Hello, everyone, and welcome again to Capsule 2 of Details, brought to you by Stardust Life-Centered Design. My name is Giselle Carr, and I am absolutely inspired, thrilled, moved to be bringing to you today Mr. Billy Almon and Dr. Legena Henry. Welcome.
Hey, sorry.
Amazing to have both of you guys here and like in the same place also. So today we're going to be talking about reimagining transportation, connecting human beings to nature and to each other. Huge topic, incredibly moving, but also no pun intended, but but incredibly inspiring as well, and with a lot of legs basically. So for centuries, human beings have moved around the world and more recently beyond it to connect with each other and with new places. In nature, transportation and migrations of various species enhance ecosystems and quality of life for both places and those being moved alike. In this conversation, we explore the dynamics of nature and human beings in motion and how centuries of these patterns of motion are pivoting and evolving as human beings adapt to climate change. So together this morning, we will explore and reflect on human connection to each other, to nature, and how this can enhance our approaches to transportation and notions of the future. Billy and Legena, thank you so much for being here. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Glad to be here.
Absolutely. And I'd just like to invite you guys to introduce yourselves to the audience. We could go ladies first, I guess. Legena.
Sure. Okay, so hi everyone. I am Legena Henry. I am a renewable energy researcher and more recently a CEO and founder of a company, Rum and Sargassum Incorporated. This is a biofuel transport company where we are producing transportation fuel from rum distillery wastewater and sargassum seaweed. Like probably a lot of the listeners know, sargassum is a major issue for many Caribbean islands that depend on tourism. So our solution, it comes at a nexus of a few needs in the region. So that need for energy security, particularly in transportation fuel. The need to have the beaches clear of sargassum seaweed for the tourism sector. And then two, the economic need of the average person in small islands like Barbados, where the cost of fuel is sometimes prohibitive. And so this use of local waste to produce something useful is an economic solution that not only benefits the countries, but the actual demand on the street. And so we're excited to work on this solution and see it come to fruition. And I'm happy to be here and to talk about that journey.
So grateful. Thank you. Thank you. Billy, could you introduce yourself?
Greetings, people of Earth. My name is Billy Almon. I am an Astrobiofuturist, which essentially means that I have the opportunity to explore the intersection of nature-inspired problem solving through this process known as biomimicry, and intersecting that with opportunities in space exploration in order to help reimagine human experiences that folks here on Earth have, as well as future space travelers will also have to experience as well. Yeah.
Yes, just possibilities at the level of the whole planet, basically. That's what I see when I look at the two of them side by side, because I think of this work as, I mean, it's just a complete game changer, each of you, in your realms. Yeah, so I think what we could do is dive a little bit deeply into each area. So maybe what we could do, we could kickstart with a little bit more about this this project that's happening in Barbados and what's happening with Rum and Sargassum, Regina. Maybe you could share a little bit with us about your approach to harnessing biofuel and what are some of the issues that you've had to overcome?
Yeah, sure. So I think a big part of this is we're taking something that we found in the lab and then taking it into the marketplace. So a lot of the times when I'm giving a presentation or a panel discussion about the solution, I remind people, so I'm a scientist, but we're coming up with a solution, a business solution, and I didn't know what the difference between equity and shares and all that stuff 1 year ago. So it's been a journey to understand all of these concepts in the business space while moving the science into there. So that's one thing. And I think for innovation in places like, so this solution came out of Barbados. And so bringing innovation to the marketplace in a place like Barbados is really like moving the walls of what is accustomed and known, what is done. So I would say it's a journey, yes, of discovery, but also of courage, because you're telling people, yeah, we're in a tiny little university in a tiny island, and our solution is going to come to the marketplace, and we're going to change a whole economic ecosystem in Barbados around energy if this solution really does the thing that it promises it can do. And so there is that whole momentum of taking something from 0 to 1, and that is a big push. I would say, so I could describe the science behind the solution. So what we, in January 2019, I started my lecturing, and the course I was lecturing was called Sustainable Energy Systems. And in one of the first lectures, we were talking about Barbados being on this path to being 100% fossil fuel free by 2030. It's written into national policy. Barbados is not going to use any fossil fuels after the year 2029, which is like less than 7.5 years. We're not going to use fossil fuels in Barbados. So a lot of talk happens around the electric grid, but in one lecture, we started talking about transport. And I said, well, we look at all the electric vehicles you see driving around Barbados. And one of my students at the front said, yeah, Dr. Henry, I can't buy an electric car now. I can't buy one next year. I probably can't buy one in 2030
I don't know if I can buy one either. Yeah.
No, but when she said that, I looked at her, I was like, yeah, either. So I was like, okay, this is fascinating. What's the answer? And thought about it. This is like the 4th week of the semester. By the end of the semester, I said, you know what? Let me grab some undergrads, and we're going to sit and we're going to brainstorm around this idea. So I pulled the 5 best performing students from that class. We got IDB to pay stipends for them that summer to do research around the question. And we sat around in the renewable energy lab, and I said, can Barbados be a little tiny Brazil? In Brazil, 2/3 of road traffic drives on sugarcane. When you drive through Barbados, all you see is reminders of sugarcane history. And so you see sugarcane fields everywhere. I mean, Trinidad is a little different, and I'm from Trinidad, and I moved to Barbados for this job. But there's parts of Trinidad you drive through and you see the beautiful cane fields on each side, and you remember your history classes and whatever. But in Barbados, I find it's basically everywhere on the inner part of the island you see cane fields. So I guess my assumption was sugarcane is plentiful in Barbados, and that would probably be the solution. But the more we delved into the question of sugarcane, it was like, okay, no, it's a dying industry. It's shrinking because of the land. The land is producing less and less cane, but also the economics. So we kind of looked at it, but we didn't get to the experiments as yet. But when we said it's not sugarcane, one of the students was on a bus heading home, and she saw mounds of sargassum on the beach. She saw cranes moving them off the beach, and she said, what about sargassum seaweed? And the way she said it to me, she had so much passion in the way she said it. I knew she wouldn't lose any. She would just go after it for the next 5 weeks. We had 5 more weeks in the summer. So I said, okay, yeah, sure. You go and run some experiments on sargassum, and I want you to look just like this for the next 5 weeks. And she went ahead and did the experiments. By then we had all of this stuff from the cane people, and we had stuff from the rum distilleries that use cane, like sugar, to produce rum, cane molasses. So we used different ingredients from the rum industry, and we used sargassum seaweed, and we produce energy. We produce energy in the lab. All the journal articles that went before said sargassum is not good for biofuel because it's too fibrous, it's too this, it's too that. We didn't know that, so we went to the lab and we did it, and it worked. And so I guess the rest is history. We've been on this path since then. The university got interested in the solution and put us out there to say, can this be one of the research ideas on this campus that we commercialize? And so that's what I'm doing full time now. Yeah.
That is fantastic. And I think there's a piece there that I know that maybe you might just want to share, which is there's the fuel, and then there's an apparatus, a device that can work with regular diesel cars, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, no. In fact, any gas car. So, and Trinidad was my model for this. In Trinidad, every month, hundreds of drivers convert to CNG. The CNG movement is blowing up in Trinidad right now. We see it in Trinidad, like normal life. A Trini would convert their gas car. Not convert, you just install the kit. It takes 4 hours. You install the kit, and now your gas car could drive on natural gas or gasoline, your choice. But on natural gas, you drive 500 kilometers for 14 TT dollars, which is $2 US. So these are the same kits we will have to use in Barbados to drive on our bio CNG, which is natural gas from biological sources. And so it is a quick fix, and part of it is that I'm from Trinidad, so I've been in that context and seen how easy it is to get a car and get the kits installed in your car, and it works. It's tropical, is our region. So that is it. So with that CNG kit, any gasoline car could drive on our fuel. Not diesel. It's a little more complex with diesel engines, but gas cars, 4 hours, and you're ready to go on either gas or biofuel, biomethane.
I mean, that is astounding. Yeah, Billy and I were just shaking our heads. We're just like, what? What? Because
wow.
Yeah, it's nothing short of miraculous almost,
I agree. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you start to think of the exponential level that things like that can scale to. I mean, obviously there's a limited amount of sargassum in the world. I don't want to be out here touting monoculture of sargassum, but yeah, when you think
massive, Giselle, you're not wrong. 20 million tons of sargassum came through the Caribbean and the Mid-Atlantic in 2017. This year, that multiplied. It was way more this year, last year. It's been getting worse in the last 7 years.
Because I guess because the ocean, the temperatures, climate change.
Temperature is one of them. There's more runoff from the rivers in Brazil, so there's more nutrients for the sargassum in the water. There's a lot of factors that add up together, and it's kind of been increasing and getting worse and worse in the academic literature, in all the journals.
Yeah, Billy, what are your thoughts, man? Because I mean, I'm just thinking of the biomimic in me, and and I see that in you because I know that so much of it is about understanding these, the fact that all of life operates within these particular rules, and that things like this, there's this like little light bulb in the back of my head. Okay, how do we scale this up? How do we scale this up? So I'm just curious your reflection on it.
Yeah, I think just in general, we've talked about this before, right? Like there's no such thing as waste in the natural world, right? Like everything is reused, and the idea of waste as fuel is, biomimetic in a lot of ways. So the idea that, we're kind of closing the loop in this very compelling, innovative way, especially this is the thing you said that I love. I love all of it, but when you said this was the thing that really stuck out. You're like, we figured out how to make this waste into fuel, and we didn't know that other people said it couldn't be done, right? like that's such a I don't know how to articulate it, but there's only certain people who are used to people telling them they can't do stuff and then figuring it out despite what other people say can't be done. And I just love that. That was the cherry on top of the reality of what you're doing for me. So yeah, it's just super dope.
Yeah, that's the truth there, right? There's a certain level of having to just buck the idea of impossibility. I think that's what all innovators really have in common, because we live in this, I mean, I hate to use the word unprecedented time again, right? That unprecedented word. But I remember when I was at school, I remember there was someone who came and gave a guest lecture, and he called it a crisis of opportunity. And that's just never left me, because then it just feels like abundance. It feels like joy. It feels like an adventure. It feels like things that we can explore together. And you know that there's so many answers. There's so many solutions. I was telling folks the other day that actually I feel more suspicious in a way when someone has one very rigid, specific answer for things, because I feel like there's a testament to humanity and human will to figure these things out. You know, like you said, like it kind of takes that little edge of saying like, well, no, we're gonna figure this out. You know, the end. So yeah, I mean, it's just so impressive. I can't wait to see that project truly commercialize, and you know, there are many steps to get there. I can imagine. You know.
Yeah, yeah. My most immediate next step is next week I head back to Barbados to start getting permits, because we're gonna do like a pilot biogas refueling station on campus.
So we're gonna come to visit you. If you see some people at your door, yeah, you know what happened.
Come on down. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Ready for you all to come.
I've been waiting on an excuse to go to Barbados, and refueling a car.
That's about
Just the excuse I needed.
Oh, it's true. No, it's really something. Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, yeah, I will never get over the level of awe I have in that about that innovation. But I just want to shift gears a little bit and maybe talk a little bit about some of your work, Billy, and a little bit about Astrobiofuturism. I mean, I'm so curious about what an Astrobiofuturist like lens would be on something like this. I mean, yeah, there's just so many possibilities. But I'm curious about why that term, what that term actually means, first of all, for our listeners, and why it's so important and central to your work. And yeah, there's also the added context of transportation. You know, how you really see transportation reflecting nature's genius in the next, 7.5, as Legena is saying, or 10, 15, 20 years. So tell us a little bit about your work.
Yeah. So for me, the term is again kind of this amalgamation of these three different worlds that I've found myself working in and being passionate about, right? So space exploration, biomimicry, and futurism as it pertains to human experiences, and how can we improve human experiences, and what happens when you look at the opportunities that are emerging by way of space exploration. When you look at the types of technology that we've collectively been able to benefit from, when you look at space technology, and even what happens when you think about the future of space exploration through the lens of nature, right? And so just that piece alone of looking at space exploration, when you realize that in a lot of ways living in space is very there's a lot of parallels between how people will have to live in space initially and how life on this planet exists, right? It costs, depending on who you're flying with, right, about 10,000 pounds, $10,000 per pound to send something up into orbit, right? So that makes the amount of things that you can carry or send with you very expensive, right? Which means you have to be very efficient with your resources, right? That's a natural factor as well in terms of life on this planet. So all of the things that live on Earth are very kind of inherently entrepreneurial. They focus on optimizing the resources that they have in their localized area, and so they have to be innovative in a lot of different ways, and their biology, their adaptations become very innovative. And so when you use that approach to innovation, where again, nothing is wasted in the natural world, and you have to find various opportunities within the cycles and limitations that you live within, you start to see areas of opportunity that can be applied to not only space, but also life here on Earth. And so I get to explore not only the past ways that we've done that, the past ways that we've explored that, but also the future of all of those things, right? The future of space, the future of design through this lens of turning to nature, and also, what are the things that we can redefine that have been problematic in the past when we consider how expansive and opportunistic our futures can be, when we just shift the way that our schema, the patterns in our brain have allowed us to decide what is and is not, right? Going back to the statement you were making a minute ago about, like, we didn't know, nobody told us that we couldn't do it. How do we get more people to have that kind of frame of thought? And the beautiful thing about this Astrobiofuturist work is I get to connect dots between different scales to help people get a different perspective on what is actually possible. So that's a big fun piece of all of the stuff I get to play with.
Yeah, I find that deeply liberating, Billy, because, well, even just for context for the audience, how we met at Bioscene, which is an event sponsored by NASA and other aerospace entities. And I remember stepping into that context and hearing the talks with my own predetermined kind of notions about it, that it just obliterated the concept of scale for me. And it really made everything, it just suddenly felt like tangible goals, like, oh, okay, we're talking about space. We're talking about, the planet is just one of many, which is like wild, I think. Yeah, you live, anywhere on Earth, obviously, but also have like an intimate relationship with nature. And, you're really close to your ecosystems and that kind of thing. Like, clearly I'm used to buying, right? But I think the average person, it may not be necessarily what they think about the scale of these issues and the solvability of these issues when you actually take a step back and really look at them and reimagine them and reframe them, as challenges to be solved in this very tangible way.
Yeah, and I think when we were talking earlier, one of the things that I think we were talking about was again, the perspective change that you get when you consider different scales and the solutions that we're talking about, right? The idea that the recycling of waste materials in Barbados could just be the solution for Barbados, but there could be another natural resource that's being wasted in Colombia or any other part of the world, and that solves their problem locally, right? Like the idea that often we get burdened with the idea that there's a global problem that we're all trying to solve in terms of climate change, but climate change is hyper local. And it's when you kind of remember that it's a collection of niche problems that are happening that do influence each other. But when you focus on the local solution, it makes the whole process a little bit more feasible and digestible. And so getting people to remember that start local, and then you'll start to see this global impact and that's again how nature is. Nature is hyper local, and so it's just those kinds of reframing that I think allow us to find, you know, gems like we have with you and Legena here, talking about innovation and the future of waste as energy.
I want to jump in. So Giselle, you said you were joking and you said you could you were talking about scale, and that Billy would step back and say it's just a planet, and it's something we don't typically do, especially because we're from Trinidad and Barbados and these tiny little places. But also, I like that term you said, Billy. You said hyper local, which I never heard, but I think I could get where you're heading with it. That it is a lot of the principles we see when we step back, and when you step in and go dig in deep, it's the same principles operating, and that life is like that. You build on these tiny little particles, and then boom, big systems, and the same principles apply in systems. It just reminded me of a thought, because we were looking at a big corporation in my little incubator for this startup business, and they were talking about this company is a world standard in terms of making the customer the center of a process. So they use them as this great example. But then one of the participants said, yeah, but this company is terrible with their employees. And so where does the principle begin and where does it end? And so I think what came out of the discussion is when you dig in and see a process around a customer, but then the process around the employee is different, then you compromise the future of that specific business or business model. And so we need to believe that if you believe a principle, then it's not just in the local application of the principle, but it should have some kind of global meaning to a principle. And I thought of one of the things, another thing you said about looking at getting out to space and being space efficient, because it costs $10,000 per pound or 10 million. I forget the number you said, but basically to head out to space, you have to respect every square millimeter of space, cubic millimeter. You have to respect every use of energy. You have to decide, well, does this experiment need to be 10 pounds or can we do it in 1 pound when you're sending something out to space? But if we were to think about resources on Earth like that, then we would probably start resembling a kind of planet, a kind of human race to the resources we have right here on Earth. And I think, so in my space, that's called circular economy principles. So like, is there a way to do a process that has no waste product, but that you could have everything kind of, and I think that's basically how our business solution is shaping up, that we find in streams of even the digestate out of our digesters will go towards agriculture and towards the same grass or sheep. We have sheep who eat, and then we use their sheep waste in the process and things like that. I think I see a lot of threads moving through what you're describing and what we are imagining as a future that's fossil fuel free, that's turning around climate change. We think we could turn around climate change with some of these solutions. And like you said, we shouldn't think of climate change as, oh no, we have to fix the whole planet, but think about, how do I fix what I'm doing here? One last thing, let me just say, and Giselle, I guess you could edit. but one last thing I was thinking is when we had first moved to Barbados, in Trinidad, they pick up garbage every day. Every day somebody comes and picks up your garbage. At least my Trinidad, I remember. But when we got to Barbados, we were just behaving like Trinis, throwing away things. And then eventually I walked outside the house like, OMG, we have like 5 bags of garbage out here. When do they pick up garbage in this country? And then I found out there was a crisis of garbage trucks in 2019, and they were only collecting garbage once every 2 weeks. So Bajans were not acting like Trinis in terms of garbage disposal. They were very conservative about what's getting thrown in the garbage, what's getting reused, what's going to recycling. And so it was embarrassing looking up and down my streets, and only the front of my house looked like the way it looked. But the thing is, I thought, wow. So I'm here to be a sustainable energy systems lecturer. And I was forced to be very strategic about garbage disposal in my house. And next thing was lights. So in Trinidad, we would leave on the lights, leave on the AC, leave on the lights, leave on the fan, leave on everything, and go up to the mall and come back. And in Barbados, your electricity bill is 7 times your Trini electricity bill. So in Trinidad, my electricity was not on my monthly budget. It's just like, oh gosh, that's like going to a movie. So I didn't think about the electricity bill in Trinidad. But in Barbados, I had to teach my kids, oh my gosh, did you just leave the bathroom and not turn off the lights in the bathroom? Did you just leave a fan on? Do you need that fan? Today's a windy day in Barbados. And so we had to change our approach to energy. But it was a constant reminder to me that, so Barbados is energy scarce compared to Trinidad. But the reason Bajans are so meticulous about energy, about waste, about everything is that they had less than what we had in Trinidad. But it took us going there to take it seriously in our lifestyle, because Trinidad was too nice to us. But to me though, so Giselle, to me, Barbados is probably a more efficient country energy-wise than Trinidad. But part of it is individuals. And yes, it's a monthly bill, it's an embarrassing front yard or whatever it is that forces you to do the right thing. But look at how each individual making a different choice in Barbados results in a different culture compared to some of the things we want to see in Trinidad, where that kind of stuff is much easier. And so people are less motivated on the personal level to make some changes.
Well, and I just want to jump on one thing that you just said, and you said, do you really need that fan? Like it's a windy day in Barbados. And the reason why I love that is because it we were talking about hyper locality, but you have a completely different sense of space, right? And place, right? Like you're feeling the wind.
Yeah, inside is outside in the Caribbean.
Right.
Everything is insulated. But back home is like, look at Giselle. She's inside her house. Look at inside.
Yes. And my house is an older house too. So it's like ventilated. There's one room that's air conditioned. Everything else is just fresh air.
And that connection to place, like natural place, also allows you, I think personally, to have a further sense of the, for lack of a better term, like the sanctity of resources, of natural resources, right? Like you're closer to the idea of the limitations of your environment than when you're in a completely boxed off place. You have no idea where your waste goes, right? When the water leaves, it's just gone. It's infinite. You think, so I think there's something about, like island innovation, and having an understanding of what your local place provides, right? Like I guarantee you, most people living here in California don't know the type of trees that are just around their block, right? Like I guarantee you, they don't know, whether or not the grass that they're watering, even during our drought, is native to California or not, right? There's no sense of local ecology, I think, for the average American. I feel like I could say that without any white paper, right? But having that sense of, these trees are here and they need X, but they provide us with X, which is why we have to take care of them, right? Having that understanding completely reframes, I think your treatment of the natural resources and your own resources, right? It makes you, again, like hyper aware and sensitive to, the opportunities around you.
Yeah.
And when you said that, Billy, I thought of Marcus Garvey, Stokely Carmichael. A lot of the leaders in the civil rights movement came from these islands. And I've heard, because I went to Howard, I've heard people say, I don't know if it's something about the wind blowing in these islands or what, but there's something about the way they thought, the way they led, that was just golden, that was just, I don't know, potent in that whole movement of the civil rights era. And I guess, yeah, I'll leave it at that. But that's another whole other conversation to have. That whole connection to your natural environment does something to the way a person thinks.
I agree. I think it's profoundly impactful on leadership, on your level of personal leadership, and also your ability to be visionary too. I mean, I remember there's a quote that sticks in my mind: "Islands are places that you look out from," but it's often you're looking at that horizon, you're imagining new things, you're creating possibilities. And, when I think about the climate crisis, I really genuinely think that it's a question or an issue of communications and will. I personally, that's my personal opinion. I really think it's a leadership issue because, as you're saying, an individual person is going to change their behavior and those behaviors add up. So, but then there's so many solutions that already exist. So you're asking yourself, well, how is it that people don't do X, Y, Z? Sometimes, as you were saying before, Legena, it might be the price of gas, it might be the price of electricity. Those macroeconomic factors will influence your behavior. But that comes down to political will, right? So that comes down to political will, and again, communication, right? How that information is communicated to people so that they understand that they all have a part to play, because we all do. The same way that we imagined and created these behaviors that have gotten us here is the same way, like, we have a whole world to change, as they say, right? We get to reimagine the whole thing. So yeah, so I just want to pivot us a bit. I know we have a few moments left. But I just wanted to kind of speak to a little bit about this idea of indigeneity of place and just really riff off of what you guys were saying, because to tie things up and wrap up, there were some deeply insightful things that I remember reading about your project, Legena, and some of the patterns that you saw when you took a step back. And I really want us to close, to be able to, before we close, we speak to a little bit of that and, just the kind of advice that you would give to aspiring innovators as well.
Yeah, sure, good. So one of the things we noticed looking at the maps of Sargassum aggregate is they trace what we learned in our history classes as children in the Caribbean as a transatlantic slave trade, where our ancestors, men and women on the coast of West Africa, were taken from their context, brought across against their will across the Atlantic Ocean, and put on cane fields and fields, agricultural fields in the Western Hemisphere, basically to build the economies of these countries on this side of the world. And when you look at the stories of that triangular trade and you look at the history of it, a lot of it is still reinforced now and still a part of our reality now. And we're still healing as a society from all of the 400 years of what happened there. And so now we're seeing Sargassum making that same journey. And you're reminded to think like Billy, of look at nature and look at the human state and things that happen. So maybe because of the currents and the winds and what happens, making it easy for ships to come in that direction, this also wasn't making it easy for Sargassum to now be coming in that direction. And then what happens is the Sargassum comes across the Atlantic and then blooms in the Caribbean Sea. And to me, that I saw poetry in that. I'm like, yes, our forefathers were brought against their will to a place they didn't want to be, and into a life they didn't want to have. But now nature is sending us this resource ticket, making the same trek and coming and blowing up on our seashores. And yes, it first came and we saw it at first as this crisis, this ugly thing, stopping tourists from enjoying our beaches or whatever, interfering with the economies of these small islands. We now see it as this resource, maybe a resource that could turn around the energy crises of many of our islands. It could turn around how we see ourselves, because we import so many solutions. So to be the ones generating the solution, the ones innovating the solution, there's a lot of redemptive threads in the outworking of this solution. And I think that was a parallel I drew the first time I presented the idea at the UN talk. I would say, even out of that, I would encourage any future innovator not to separate yourself and your humanity from your solution. And there's a beauty in who you are, and there's a key in who you are in terms of how the solution realizes, how it works out. And you can't separate those things. I think move courageously into who you are and your identity, and even in the outworking of your solution and your unique perspective and your unique qualities and your history and your past and the things that made you who you are, and not separate from the solution that you generate. And so that would be my even from that parallel, that would be my advice to any emerging innovator.
Yeah. It's so profound. I mean, I really get chills, like some of these things that we're talking about today, because just think back of how many people that we have impacted and how many people are going to be positively influenced, by these words, even these thoughts and these words that we're expressing today. So I'm curious how that lands for you, Billy. Like, how would you reflect on that, and what kind of advice would you give to someone who's aspiring to transform transportation and transform connections?
Yeah, I think lately a lot of the work that I've kind of been exploring is around indigenous pasts, present, and futures. And so I'm a big nerd, and I love Black Panther. I just love it. And one of the main reasons I love it is because at the end of the day, it's really the story of how an indigenous community was able to forge their own path and their own future, sans colonization. And I think that the idea of, the story that you don't often hear about the transatlantic slave trade is this idea that indigenous people were taken from their land, kidnapped, and brought to another land because of their indigeneity, right? Because they were colonizers were looking for skilled laborers. Okay, they needed people who knew how to farm and grow crops and build buildings and create cities, right? You're not just looking for just dumb hands to do work. So they were taken from their land because of their ingenious ability to create and cultivate, and brought to a new land in order to do that in a new place. And were also forced to, in a sense, re-indigenate themselves to that land, and then also forsake all the knowledge that they had about it because they were taught to be terrified of that landscape. So the idea, again, which is why I love this conversation with both of you, and what you're doing, Legena, in terms of taking these natural, the natural knowledge that you have of the land that you're on, and reinventing, honestly revolutionizing a whole industry. The idea that cars that have existed and have been polluting can now be clean, right? Versus creating new lines of cars, like that's just revolutionary. So I think there's just so much to still unpack there in terms of indigenous innovation, and I think what you're already doing is very much in the vein of us doing that collectively.
Yes, thank you, Billy. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's just, yeah, this has been a very moving, very special conversation. I realize it is just, I'm thinking of the word inflection point. It's just, yeah, you could feel all of the various amounts of meaning and components that's inside of the conversation. And it feels like a beginning. I hope it deeply inspires someone and it deeply moves someone to shift the way that they look at paradigms and perhaps, continue to create those possibilities for connection. So guys, yeah, thank you so much for your time today. I mean, is there anything else you want to say? I'm just so grateful you guys came on board and found the time today.
Thanks, Giselle. And it sounds amazing, the whole thing you're doing. And I'm excited to just see the whole thing because I didn't know what the whole program was until you just described it. And
Yeah.
I'm excited to be part of it, and I feel privileged to be part of it. So thank you. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the content.
Amen.
Same. Can't wait to show you guys off, man. Can't wait to show you guys off.